The morning after Camilla's confession brought a different kind of crisis to the royal household. Word of the discovery had reached Buckingham Palace during the night, and by 7 a.m., King Charles was demanding a private meeting with his wife. The conversation that followed would determine not just Camilla's future, but the survival of their marriage and his reign. Charles arrived at Clarence's house with a face like thunder. Staff members who had worked for him for decades had never seen him so angry. He walked past everyone without acknowledgement, heading directly to Camilla's private sitting room where she was waiting with Margaret Thornton and Detective Inspector Mitchell. "Everyone out," he said coldly. "I need to speak with my wife alone." The room emptied quickly, leaving the king and queen facing each other across a chasm of broken trust that seemed impossible to bridge. What happened in that room during the next hour would be reconstructed later from what Charles and Camilla told their closest advisors. 20 years, Charles said, his voice shaking with rage. "For 20 years, you've been spying on me, on my family, on everyone around us. How could you?" Camilla had spent the sleepless night preparing for this confrontation, but facing her husband's fury was harder than she had expected. "I was protecting us, Charles. Protecting you. There were people trying to destroy our relationship from the beginning. By recording my private conversations, by photographing my family, by violating every trust one ever placed in you." The argument that followed revealed the depth of damage that decades of palace intrigue had caused to their relationship. Charles felt betrayed not just by the surveillance, but by the fact that Camilla had never trusted him enough to share her fears and concerns openly. "You could have talked to me," he said. "We could have faced these challenges together. Instead, you chose to spy on everyone around us, including me." But Camilla's response revealed a different perspective on their relationship and the pressure she had faced as an outsider trying to find acceptance within the royal family. "Talk to you? When, Charles? Between your official duties and family obligations, when would we have had these conversations? And what could you have done anyway? You were fighting your own battles with the establishment." The conversation continued for over an hour, with decades of accumulated resentments and misunderstandings finally being aired. Charles learned things about palace politics that he had never suspected, while Camilla heard about the pressure her husband had faced from family members who had never accepted their relationship. When they finally emerged from the room, both looked exhausted but somehow less angry. Whatever they had said to each other had not resolved the crisis, but it had at least helped them understand each other's perspective on the surveillance operation. Detective Inspector Mitchell was waiting in the hallway with several boxes of evidence that required immediate attention. Analysis of the recordings had revealed information that could not be ignored, regardless of the royal family's desire for privacy. "Your Majesty," she said to King Charles, "we need to discuss some specific recordings that have national security implications. There are conversations involving government ministers that appear to contain classified information." The next phase of the investigation took place in a secure facility in central London, away from the palace and the media attention that was beginning to build around rumors of a major royal scandal. Technical experts had been working through the night to analyze the surveillance equipment and determine exactly what information had been collected and whether any of it had been transmitted to outside parties. The findings were both reassuring and troubling. The good news was that there was no evidence that any of the information had been shared with foreign governments, criminal organizations, or media outlets. All the surveillance equipment was designed to collect and store information locally rather than transmit it remotely. The bad news was the sheer volume of sensitive information that had been recorded. Government ministers discussing classified defense contracts. Foreign ambassadors sharing confidential diplomatic intelligence. Senior civil servants revealing details about policy decisions that were still under discussion. Sir Geoffrey Palmer, the cabinet secretary, arrived at the secure facility that afternoon to assess the potential damage to government operations. As the most senior civil servant in the country, he would determine whether criminal charges should be filed and what steps needed to be taken to protect national security. "This is unprecedented," he said after reviewing a sample of the transcripts. "We're dealing with potential breaches of the Official Secrets Act on a massive scale. The fact that it was done by a member of the royal family doesn't make it any less serious." But as investigators dug deeper into the recordings, a more complex picture began to emerge. The surveillance operation had not just collected sensitive information, it had also revealed corruption and misconduct that had gone undetected for years. One recording from 2019 captured a conversation between a government minister and a defense contractor that clearly involved illegal payments in exchange for favorable contract terms. Another transcript from 2020 documented a senior civil servant sharing classified information with journalists in exchange for favorable media coverage. Your Majesty appears to have inadvertently documented several serious crimes, Detective Inspector Mitchell told King Charles during a private briefing. The question is what to do with this information. The legal implications were becoming more complex by the hour. While Camilla had clearly broken the law by recording conversations without consent, she had also uncovered evidence of corruption and criminal behavior by government officials. Prosecuting her could mean protecting the very people she had exposed. Meanwhile, other members of the royal family were learning about the surveillance operation and demanding their own briefings about what had been recorded. Prince William arrived at the secure facility that evening, his face grim with the knowledge that his private conversations with family members had been documented for years. "Show me what she recorded about me," he said bluntly. The recordings involving Prince William revealed the private struggles of a man trying to balance his role as future king with his desire to protect his family's privacy. Conversations with his father about modernizing the monarchy. Arguments with his brother Harry about media strategy. Private discussions with his wife Catherine about the pressures of royal life. None of the recordings showed William in a negative light, but their existence represented a fundamental violation of trust that would affect family relationships for years to come. How do you maintain normal family bonds when you know that your private conversations may have been recorded and transcribed? Prince Harry, contacted in California, initially refused to believe the reports about his stepmother's surveillance operation. His relationship with the royal family was already strained, and news that his private conversations had been recorded for years only deepened his anger and alienation. "This explains so much," he told investigators during a secure video call. "The way she always seemed to know things that had been discussed in private. The way she could navigate palace politics despite being an outsider. She was playing a completely different game than the rest of us." The investigation also revealed that Camilla's surveillance operation had documented the gradual breakdown of Harry's relationship with the rest of the royal family. Recordings from 2018 and 2019 captured private conversations where family members discussed their growing concerns about Harry's media interviews and his relationship with Meghan Markle. These recordings provided an unprecedented inside view of how the royal family had handled the crisis that ultimately led to Harry and Meghan's departure from royal duties. They showed family members struggling to balance their love for Harry with their duty to protect the institution of the monarchy. But perhaps the most significant discovery came when investigators analyzed recordings from 2022, shortly after Queen Elizabeth's death. The conversations revealed the private discussions between Charles and his advisors about how to modernize the monarchy and address public concerns about the royal family's relevance in modern Britain. "Your Majesty was planning significant changes to the monarchy," Detective Inspector Mitchell told King Charles. "Reducing the number of working royals, opening up palace finances to greater scrutiny, and taking a more active role in addressing social issues like homelessness and climate change." The recordings showed a king who was far more progressive in private than his public image suggested, but they also revealed the resistance he faced from traditionalists within the palace establishment. Camilla's surveillance had documented a power struggle that was still ongoing behind closed doors. As the investigation entered its final phase, difficult decisions had to be made about how to proceed. The government was under pressure to prosecute Camilla for violation of privacy laws and potential breaches of national security. But pursuing criminal charges against the Queen would create a constitutional crisis that could bring down both the government and the monarchy. Sir Geoffrey Palmer met with the Prime Minister and senior cabinet ministers to discuss their options. The political implications were staggering. If the government prosecuted the Queen, it would be seen as an attack on the monarchy itself. If they didn't prosecute, it would send a message that members of the royal family were above the law. "We're damned if we do and damned if we don't," the Prime Minister said during a private meeting with his closest advisors. But we have to consider what's best for the country, not what's politically convenient. The solution that emerged was unprecedented in its scope and implications. Queen Camilla would not face criminal charges, but she would be required to step back from all public duties indefinitely. The surveillance equipment would be destroyed, and all recordings would be sealed under the Official Secrets Act for 50 years. More importantly, the investigation had exposed serious flaws in royal security that needed to be addressed immediately. New protocols were established for regular security sweeps of royal residences, and all members of the royal family were required to undergo security briefings about potential surveillance threats. The public announcement came 3 weeks after the initial discovery. Buckingham Palace released a carefully worded statement saying that Queen Camilla was stepping back from royal duties due to personal health concerns and that she would be taking time to focus on private family matters. The media speculated wildly about the real reasons for Camilla's sudden withdrawal from public life, but the true story remained classified. Only a handful of people knew about the surveillance operation and the evidence that had been uncovered in her private dressing room. King Charles continued his royal duties, but those close to him noticed a change in his demeanor. The man who had waited decades to become king now seemed burdened by the knowledge of what his wife had done and what it meant for their relationship and his reign. The royal family began the slow process of rebuilding trust and establishing new ways of communicating that didn't involve surveillance and suspicion. Family meetings were held to address the breakdown in relationships that had been revealed by Camilla's recordings. But the damage could not be easily repaired. The surveillance operation had exposed decades of palace intrigue, family conflicts, and institutional problems that had been hidden from public view. The monarchy that emerged from the crisis would be different, more transparent, but also more fragile than before. Camilla herself remained in seclusion at a private estate in Scotland, away from the media attention and family members who felt betrayed by her actions. The woman who had fought for 20 years to gain acceptance within the royal family had ultimately achieved her goal, only to lose everything through her own efforts to protect what she had worked so hard to build. The investigation was officially closed, but its implications would continue to reverberate through the royal family and British government for years to come. The hidden compartment in Queen Camilla's dressing room had revealed secrets that changed everything, proving that sometimes the most dangerous threats to institutions come from within rather than from outside enemies. The monarchy would survive, as it had survived countless scandals and crises throughout its history. But the discovery of Camilla's surveillance operation marked the end of an era of secrecy and the beginning of a new chapter where trust would have to be rebuilt from the ground up. Queen Camilla's car pulled through the gates of Clarence House at 8:15 p.m. She had spent the day smiling for cameras and making speeches about childhood literacy, completely unaware that her private world was being dissected by investigators. Margaret Thornton met her at the entrance with a carefully neutral expression that immediately put the Queen on alert. "Your Majesty, we need to speak privately," Margaret said, guiding Camilla away from the usual evening routine. "There has been a development that requires your immediate attention." Camilla could read people well after years in public life. Margaret's forced calm and the unusual number of security personnel visible throughout the house told her that whatever had happened was serious. She followed her private secretary to a small sitting room where Detective Inspector Mitchell was waiting. Mitchell had been dreading this moment. How do you tell a queen that investigators have discovered what appears to be a decades-long surveillance operation in her private dressing room? She chose directness over diplomacy. "Your Majesty, during today's routine security sweep, we discovered a hidden compartment in your dressing room. Inside were filing cabinets containing surveillance equipment, audio recordings, and photographs spanning more than 20 years. Camilla's reaction surprised everyone in the room. Instead of shock or denial, her face went completely pale, and she sat down heavily in the nearest chair. For several long moments, she said nothing, staring at her hands folded in her lap. "I see," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wondered when this day would come." The admission sent shockwaves through the room. Margaret dropped her notebook, while Detective Inspector Mitchell felt her assumptions about the case completely crumble. They had been preparing for denials, explanations, or claims of ignorance. They had not expected a confession. Your Majesty, Mitchell said carefully. Are you saying you were aware of the surveillance equipment? Camilla looked up, and, for the first time in years, people saw her without the carefully constructed public persona. She looked tired, frightened, and much older than her years. I installed it, she said simply. All of it. The recordings, the photographs, everything you found. I've been documenting conversations and events for over 20 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret Thornton had worked for the royal family for 15 years and thought she understood the complexities of palace life. This revelation changed everything she thought she knew about her employer. Mitchell leaned forward. Why, Your Majesty? What was the purpose of the surveillance? Camilla's story began in 1998, 3 years before she would officially become Prince Charles's partner. She had been thrust into a world where every word was analyzed, every gesture scrutinized, and every relationship questioned. The media attention was relentless, but it was the internal palace politics that truly frightened her. You have to understand, she began. I was never supposed to be part of this family. Diana's death had made me the most hated woman in Britain. The palace courtiers saw me as a temporary embarrassment that would eventually disappear. I needed to protect myself. The recordings had started as insurance. Camilla knew that conversations were happening about her future, discussions that would determine whether she would be quietly pushed aside or eventually accepted into the royal family. She installed her first recording device in Charles's study at Highgrove, documenting meetings between her partner and senior palace advisors. I heard them planning to separate us, she continued. There were detailed discussions about how to end our relationship without creating a public scandal. They talked about me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person Charles loved. The early recordings revealed a palace establishment that was deeply divided about how to handle the relationship between Charles and Camilla. Some advisors believed that public opinion would never accept her as queen, while others argued that the monarchy needed to modernize and embrace the reality of Charles's chosen partner. As months turned to years, Camilla's surveillance operation expanded. She documented private family gatherings where her future was discussed, recorded phone calls between palace officials and media representatives, and photographed private meetings that could affect her position within the royal family. I never intended for it to become so extensive, she admitted. But once you start, it's difficult to stop. Every conversation might contain information that could be used against you. Every private meeting might be planning your downfall. The equipment had evolved over the years as technology advanced. What started with simple audio recorders hidden in furniture had expanded to include digital devices that could transmit information remotely. Camilla had educated herself about surveillance techniques, learning how to place cameras and microphones where they would go undetected. Detective Inspector Mitchell was struggling to understand the implications of what she was hearing. Your Majesty, some of these recordings include conversations with government ministers and foreign dignitaries. That's potentially a matter of national security. Camilla nodded slowly. I know. I recorded everything because I never knew what information might become important. Conversations that seemed innocent at the time sometimes revealed patterns that helped me understand what was really happening behind the scenes. The transcripts they had found were Camilla's own work, created during long nights when she would listen to recordings and document exactly what had been said. She had developed her own system of codes and abbreviations, creating detailed records that could be referenced years later. The photographs were the hardest part, she continued. Taking pictures of family members without their knowledge felt like a betrayal, but I needed visual evidence of who was meeting with whom. Words could be denied, but photographs don't lie. Some of the most damaging photographs showed private moments between family members during times of crisis. Arguments between William and Harry that had never been reported in the media. Tense discussions between Charles and his mother about the future of the monarchy. Intimate family moments that revealed the human side of the royal family's public facade. Margaret Thornton was beginning to understand the scope of what her employer had been doing. Your Majesty, what did you do with all this information? I kept it, Camilla said simply. All of it. I never sold anything to the media or used it to harm anyone. It was insurance, nothing more. Proof that I understood what was really happening around me. The revelation explained many things that had puzzled observers over the years. Camilla's ability to navigate complex palace politics with surprising skill. her seeming immunity to certain types of media attacks, her gradual acceptance by family members who had initially been hostile to her presence. You used the information to protect yourself, Mitchell observed. And to protect Charles, Camilla added. There were plots against him too. People who wanted to see him pass over the throne to William. Advisors who thought the monarchy would be better off without him. I documented all of it. The conversation continued for over 2 hours as Camilla revealed the full extent of her surveillance operation. She had recorded thousands of private conversations, photographed hundreds of secret meetings, and accumulated enough compromising information to bring down the entire royal family if she chose to use it. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came near the end of their conversation. Camilla was not the only member of the royal family who had been conducting surveillance. Her investigation had revealed similar operations run by other family members, each protecting their own interests and gathering intelligence on their relatives. The palace is full of secrets, she said wearily. Everyone is watching everyone else. Everyone is protecting themselves. I just became better at it than most. Detective Inspector Mitchell realized they were dealing with something far more complex than a single rogue operation. The evidence suggested a royal family where trust had completely broken down, where family members spied on each other as a matter of survival. The implications for the monarchy were staggering. If the public learned that the royal family had been conducting surveillance operations against each other for decades, it would destroy any remaining mystique and respect for the institution. The carefully maintained image of a united family serving the nation would be revealed as a complete fiction. As the evening wore on, more details emerged about specific recordings and their contents. Some contained information that could embarrass government ministers or foreign dignitaries. Others revealed family secrets that could destroy relationships and reputations. All of it had been carefully documented and preserved by a woman who had been fighting for survival in a hostile environment. What happens now? Margaret asked as the conversation began to wind down. Detective Inspector Mitchell looked at Queen Camilla, who was sitting quietly in her chair, looking smaller and more vulnerable than anyone had ever seen her. That depends on what your Majesty wants to do with the information. I want it destroyed, Camilla said without hesitation. All of it. The recordings, the photographs, the transcripts. Everything. I never want to see any of it again. But destroying the evidence would not be simple. Government ministers and foreign dignitaries who had been recorded would need to be notified. Security services would need to assess whether any classified information had been compromised. The investigation would need to continue to understand the full scope of the surveillance operation. And there was still the question of whether criminal charges should be filed. Recording private conversations without consent was illegal in many circumstances. Installing surveillance equipment in government buildings could constitute espionage. The legal implications were as complex as the political ones. As midnight approached, plans were made for the investigation to continue the next day. Queen Camilla would be questioned further about specific recordings and their contents. Technical experts would analyze the equipment to understand its capabilities and determine whether any information had been transmitted to outside parties. The Queen returned to her private apartments that night knowing that her life had irrevocably changed. The secret she had kept for over 20 years was now known to investigators, and soon it would need to be shared with other members of the royal family. The surveillance operation that had begun as self-protection had become the very thing that might destroy her position within the monarchy. Margaret Thornton worked through the night, making careful notes about the conversation and beginning the delicate process of informing senior palace officials about the discovery. By morning, the highest levels of government would know that Queen Camilla had been running an extensive surveillance operation for over 2 decades. The investigation had taken an unexpected turn. Instead of uncovering an external threat to royal security, they had discovered that the threat had come from within the royal family itself. The implications would take months to fully understand, but one thing was already clear. The monarchy would never be the same again. The morning started like any other at Clarence House. Queen Camilla had left early for a charity event in Birmingham, her schedule packed with ribbon cuttings and speeches about literacy programs. The staff moved through their usual routines, dusting antiques and preparing for her return. Nobody expected that by afternoon, the entire royal household would be turned upside down. Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell received the call at 11:47 a.m. A routine security sweep had turned into something much more serious. She grabbed her coat and drove through London traffic, wondering why the Royal Protection Squad needed Scotland Yard's assistance for what should have been a standard procedure. The security sweep had been scheduled weeks ago. Every few months, the protection officers conducted thorough searches of royal residences, checking for listening devices, hidden cameras, or anything that might compromise safety. These sweeps were so routine that most staff barely noticed them happening. Officer James Crawford had been with the Royal Protection Squad for 8 years. He knew every inch of Clarence House, from the grand reception rooms to the servants' quarters. When he entered Queen Camilla's private dressing room that morning, he expected to find the usual collection of designer gowns, royal jewels, and elegant shoes arranged in perfect order. The dressing room was enormous, larger than most people's entire bedrooms. Custom-built wardrobes lined the walls, each section organized by color and occasion. Evening gowns hung in protective covers, while day dresses were arranged by season. Shoes filled an entire wall, from comfortable walking shoes to glittering heels for state dinners. Crawford began his systematic search, checking behind mirrors and inside jewelry boxes for any unusual devices. He had done this same search dozens of times before. The electronic detector in his hand swept across surfaces, listening for the telltale signals that would indicate hidden surveillance equipment. 20 minutes into the search, the detector began beeping near a section of the wardrobe that held Camilla's collection of vintage coats. Crawford frowned. The beeping was consistent and strong, suggesting something metallic hidden behind the wooden panel. He called for backup and began examining the area more carefully. The wood paneling looked identical to the rest of the wardrobe, but when he pressed against it, one section felt different. With careful pressure, a hidden panel slid open, revealing a space that shouldn't have existed. Inside the secret compartment, Crawford found something that made him immediately radio for his supervisor. Metal filing cabinets filled the hidden space, each one locked with heavy-duty security mechanisms. The compartment extended much deeper than anyone would have guessed, clearly a professional installation that had been planned and executed with precision. Detective Inspector Mitchell arrived to find the royal household in controlled chaos. Staff members whispered in corners while senior protection officers stood guard around the dressing room. The Queen's private secretary, Margaret Thornton, paced nervously in the hallway, making urgent phone calls to Buckingham Palace. "What exactly have we found?" Mitchell asked Crawford as they stood outside the hidden compartment. 4 filing cabinets, all locked. Professional installation, probably done years ago. The electronic signature suggests some kind of surveillance or recording equipment, but we haven't opened anything yet. We're waiting for authorization from the palace. Mitchell peered into the secret space. The filing cabinets were expensive, the kind used by government agencies for sensitive documents. Each was labeled with a simple numbering system: Cabinet 1, Cabinet 2, Cabinet 3, Cabinet 4. No indication of what might be inside. The authorization came from Buckingham Palace within an hour. King Charles himself had given permission for the investigation to proceed, with the understanding that absolute discretion would be maintained until they understood what they were dealing with. A locksmith arrived from a security firm that regularly worked with government agencies. Each filing cabinet required different techniques to open, suggesting they had been secured at different times and possibly by different people. The first cabinet opened with a series of metallic clicks that seemed to echo through the silent dressing room. Inside Cabinet 1, Mitchell found something that made her understand why this discovery needed to stay secret. Hundreds of audio cassette tapes filled the drawers, each one carefully labeled with dates, times, and cryptic location codes. The dates went back over 20 years, long before Camilla had become queen. The tapes were organized chronologically, starting from the late 1990s and continuing through to just a few months ago. Each tape was in a protective case with detailed information written in what appeared to be Camilla's own handwriting. Location codes like BPDR and CHSD were written alongside timestamps and brief notes about participants. Cabinet 2 contained more modern technology. Digital recording devices, some no larger than buttons, filled custom foam inserts. Tiny cameras that could be hidden in jewelry or clothing accessories were arranged in careful rows. The equipment was professional grade, the kind used by intelligence services rather than private individuals. But it was Cabinet 3 that made Mitchell realize they were dealing with something far beyond a simple security breach. Inside were transcripts, hundreds of pages of typed conversations with dates, times, and locations that matched the audio tapes. Someone had been systematically documenting and transcribing private conversations for over 2 decades. The transcripts were incredibly detailed, not just dialogue, but descriptions of body language, tone of voice, and emotional reactions. Whoever had created these documents had been trained in surveillance techniques and had been remarkably thorough in their work. As Mitchell flipped through the pages, certain names kept appearing. Senior members of the royal family, government ministers, foreign dignitaries, and media figures. The conversations covered everything from state dinners to private family gatherings. Nothing seemed to be off-limits. Cabinet 4 was locked with a more sophisticated mechanism than the others. When it finally opened, Mitchell found herself looking at something that would change how she viewed the entire royal family. Inside were photographs, thousands of them, organized in manila folders with dates and location information. The photographs weren't the usual public relations images that the royal family regularly shared with the media. These were candid shots, taken without the subject's knowledge. Family arguments, private meetings, intimate moments between family members, all documented with the precision of a professional surveillance operation. Some photographs showed conversations between King Charles and government ministers in what appeared to be private study rooms. Others captured heated discussions between family members during supposedly private gatherings. The level of access required to take these photographs suggested that whoever was behind this operation had been planning it for years. Margaret Thornton had been watching the investigation unfold with growing concern. As Queen Camilla's private secretary, she was responsible for protecting her employer's reputation and privacy. What they were discovering in the hidden compartment could destroy not just Camilla's position, but the entire monarchy's credibility. "How long do you think this has been going on?" she asked Mitchell as they examined the evidence spread across several tables in an adjacent room. "Based on the dates, over 20 years. This isn't amateur work. Whoever set this up had professional training and significant resources. The equipment alone would have cost tens of thousands of pounds." The implications were staggering. If Queen Camilla had been running a surveillance operation against her own family and the government for over 2 decades, it represented a breach of trust that went to the heart of the constitutional monarchy. But if someone else had been using her private space for surveillance, it suggested a security failure of unprecedented proportions. As the afternoon wore on, more details emerged that complicated the picture. The handwriting on the tape labels appeared to be Camilla's, but handwriting analysis would be needed to confirm it. The timing of the recordings suggested someone with intimate access to royal family schedules and private events. Some of the transcripts contained information that had never been made public, details about private family disputes and government policy discussions that only a handful of people would have known. The level of access suggested either an insider operation or a security breach that had gone undetected for decades. Detective Inspector Mitchell had investigated numerous high-profile cases during her career, but nothing had prepared her for the complexity of what they were uncovering. Each new piece of evidence raised more questions than it answered. Who had authorized this operation? What was the purpose of collecting so much information? And, most importantly, where had all this intelligence been going? The recording equipment was sophisticated enough to transmit information remotely. If someone had been using Camilla's private space as a base for surveillance operations, they might have been sending intelligence to unknown recipients for years. The implications for national security were enormous. As evening approached, the investigation team realized they were dealing with something that went far beyond a simple royal family scandal. The scope and sophistication of the operation suggested connections to intelligence services, foreign governments, or criminal organizations. The stakes were much higher than anyone had initially understood. Margaret Thornton made another series of urgent phone calls to Buckingham Palace. King Charles would need to be briefed immediately, and decisions would have to be made about how to proceed. The investigation could not remain secret for long, and the media would inevitably learn about the discovery. The staff at Clarence House had been sworn to absolute secrecy, but Everyone understood that news of this magnitude could not be contained indefinitely. Plans were already being made to move the investigation to a more secure location where the evidence could be properly analyzed without risk of leaks. As the sun set over London, Detective Inspector Mitchell looked at the boxes of evidence that had been carefully catalogued and sealed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they began the difficult process of understanding exactly what had been happening in Queen Camilla's private space and why. The discovery in the hidden compartment had already changed everything. Trust within the royal family would never be the same, and the investigation ahead would test the very foundations of the monarchy. Whatever the truth turned out to be, the consequences would be felt for years to come. The Queen would return from Birmingham that evening, unaware that her private world had been turned upside down. How she reacted to the discovery would determine not just her own future, but the future of the entire royal family. The hidden compartment had revealed secrets that someone had been keeping for over 20 years, and now those secrets were about to change everything.